Welcome to this radio video, and this is the solar activity and propagation report for June the 26th, 2014. So every Thursday we bring you news of what happened in the past week with solar activity and propagation, what's coming in the week ahead until next Thursday. Well, sun is pretty quiet. Here you see an image of the sun surface, which is an image from yesterday, June 25th. And you see that there are a few sunspots on the surface, but most of them are quite stable and don't really pose a threat for any solar flares right now. Solar activity has steadily gone down in the past week, and we're actually at very low levels. If we look at solar flux for 1200 UT, June 26, we're at 97, below 100 mark. I always say the 100 mark is kind of a threshold. When we get below 100, we start to see the effects of a lower solar flux. Higher frequencies don't propagate as well, and you might actually see that any frequencies above 15 megahertz of very long distance propagation might actually be weaker than usual. I was checking this morning the KBS World Radio signal on 15575, which is actually very strong. It was almost S9 plus 10, which means that we still have good propagation. And because of the very low geomagnetic activity right now, as we see here, K2 this morning, signals are quite good, and signals that cross the poles are actually very strong. Now, 97 isn't the worst propagation that you can have. That's more into the 60s or 70s. When we're in a very, very low solar activity, the solar flux will tend to go into the 60s. 60 is the lowest number you can get of solar flux. That's bad. 60 is very low and actually doesn't help in higher frequency propagation. But apart from that, being close to 100, I've noticed, for example, last night, all signals that I was listening to last night from Europe, Romania, Voice of Vietnam, which is transmitted via the UK, and Radio Tirana, all were very, very good yesterday. So propagation is actually quite good. It's just that the higher bands, let's say 16 meter band, 17 megahertz, and also the 13 meter band, 21 megahertz, are probably a little weaker as we go below 100 solar flux. So basically last week what happened is that the solar flux went down, 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 and finally reached a below 100 value somewhere through the weekend. We had a first part of the weekend last week that was a little bit in the geomagnetic storming. We had some CMEs that actually, some coronal mass ejections that actually kind of whipped our geomagnetic field here on Earth. So we didn't have the best propagation last weekend. But now this week, pretty much starting, I would say, Monday, Tuesday of this week, we started having quiet conditions. Even if the solar flux was lower, the fact that the K index stays to 2 or below 2 is actually a good indication of propagation. What will be happening? Well, first of all, at close to 100, we're in a K index of 2 or less, we actually should have pretty good propagation through the weekend. Don't expect the higher frequencies though to propagate very well. This at 97, we're not much into a 10-meter amateur radio band opening. But we are in the high of the summer here, and one interesting feature of propagation in the summer in North America is, and Europe also, is what we call sporadic E-skip. If you have very warm weather, thunderstorms, or you know that very close to you there are big thunderstorms, check out sporadic e-skip because they seem to be related to weather. And I know that, for example, here in Montreal, we're getting into some very warm summer weather this weekend. We'll be reaching 30 degrees Celsius Saturday, Sunday, Monday, but with some cooling on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. So it means that there will be probably thunderstorms. There will also be a cold front. And these are conditions that help sporadic E. And sporadic E are very, very strong ionized patches of the ionosphere, and they really, really give propagation to very high frequencies, well into the 50 megahertz. And actually, a lot of people use this to DX the FM band, lower part of the FM band, listening to stations far away. So what's to expect? As of now, nothing special. So we should have pretty much quiet conditions as long as we don't have anything that will whip our solar or geomagnetic field, that is. We are into a very quiet conditions for the next few days, and I expect this to continue for the next days. Solar flex will hover around the 100 mark, so expect it to not really lower much below 90, 97, 95, because we are in a higher solar activity and there are a few spots. So it's not like the sun is totally quiet here. We do have a few spots. As for the K index, with no CMEs and no really strong coronal holes on the sun that lets the solar wind go through, we should stay in a very, very quiet condition. As we see here on the update, solar update here of 26 June, it says that no Earth-directed coronal mass ejections were observed during the past day. So, and there was a very minor C2 flare. So it means that these are very, very, very weak conditions. Nothing very special here. So it's going to stay like that, and I expect to have a Friday, Saturday, Sunday weekend propagation to be good, and with the K index staying very low, it should be very good actually. So don't expect to have very high frequencies propagating well, but it shouldn't be too bad. You know, a solar flux of close to 100 is actually not that bad. And that should actually continue pretty much throughout our next week, you know, until our next report. Like I always say, there are always surprises. The sun is surprising and can at any time really, really, really unleash strong flares and CMEs. And so you still have to be careful. Check out your propagation websites. One of the sites that I go often to just check the indices is really the dx.qsl.net/propagation. The first part of the page here with these current solar indices, that's probably the best information you can have as to what the conditions are like. You want to have a solar flux, highest solar flux possible. K index below 2 or below, and if it's closer to 1 or 0, it's even better. So as long as it's 2 or below. Anyways, these indices have colors. When the K index passes the 3 mark, it becomes yellow, and if it goes really high, it becomes red. The A index also. For those that don't know what they mean, K index is the current geomagnetic storming, if we want. So below 3, usually solar, the geomagnetic field of Earth is pretty quiet. The A index is a value that is the average, if we want, of the last 24 hours. So which means that if, for example, in the last 24 hours we had a K index that averaged 6 or 7, which means it's really storming, well, the A index will go up to 70, 80, 90. It's going to go higher. So you want to have K index as low as possible. And if you're wondering why the past 24 hours were bad, you can check the A index. If it is above 20 or 30, you know that last 24 hours were kind of stormy and geomagnetic fields were really unsettled. So expect some good propagation this weekend and in the coming week, and hopefully our sun will stay quiet, but you know, we wouldn't say no to a few more sunspots to raise that solar flux just enough to actually give us some better high frequency propagation. So good DXing for the weekend, and hope you enjoyed this report. See you next Thursday for another solar activity report. Take care, 73s.